You, curious soul of the night, have you ever noticed how the wilderness can feel peaceful right up until it feels aware of you? The following horror stories unfold far from help. In this intimate narration, even the quiet can turn against you. Stay close. Don't look away. My brother Jason and I moved to Wyoming a few years back. We'd always wanted to live near the mountains, but neither of us could afford it alone. So we split the rent on a small townhouse just outside of Jackson. It wasn't much, but the view of the Tetons from our front porch made every morning feel unreal. The hiking trails nearby were usually crowded during the warmer months. Tourists with cameras, families on weekend trips, hikers chasing the perfect photo. Finding peace and quiet was almost impossible. That's why Jason suggested a 3-day backpacking trip deep into the backcountry, far from the marked trails and the noise of other people. A couple of weeks later, we loaded the car and headed toward the trailhead near the Bridger Teton Wilderness. When we arrived, only one other vehicle was parked there, an old, dust-caked SUV that looked like it hadn't moved in days. That struck me as odd, but also reassuring. The fewer people out here, the better. The first day's hike was long but beautiful. The terrain stayed flat through wide meadows before climbing steadily toward evening. The final stretch up the ridge was exhausting, but Jason swore the view would make it worth it. And he was right. About 3/4 up the mountain, we found a small plateau overlooking an entire valley, with a river winding through the trees below. The sun was beginning to dip behind the jagged peaks, setting the whole sky glowing orange and gold. We pitched our tents, built a small fire, and sat down to relax. The sound of the wind moving through the pines was the only thing breaking the silence. We talked for hours until a sudden noise made both of us freeze. From somewhere down the trail came the slow, rhythmic crunch of footsteps. We turned toward the darkness, listening as they drew closer. A few seconds later, a man stepped into the edge of our firelight. He wasn't wearing a headlamp, which immediately sent up red flags. No one who knows these mountains would hike without one at night. He smiled as he approached. "Evening," he said in a casual tone that didn't match the situation. Jason stood up. "Hey, do you need something?" The man's grin didn't fade. "Park ranger," he said. "This area is closed for the season. You boys need to pack up and come with me." Right away, I felt something was wrong. We both knew this section of the park was open. We had gotten permits from the state just the day before, and no ranger would be out here alone at night without a radio or gear. Jason's jaw tightened. "We didn't see any closure notices online," he said carefully. The man took a step closer, the firelight flickering across his face. "Doesn't matter. Grab your things and follow me. I'll take you back to the trailhead." Neither of us moved. The only sound was the fire crackling between us. His grin didn't change. It just stayed there, stretched and empty. For a long moment, I thought he might try something. Finally, Jason said, steady but low, "We're staying here." The man stared at him, the grin twitching slightly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the dark. We didn't speak for a long time. Every sound, every gust of wind or snapping branch made us flinch. A few times, I swore I heard faint footsteps circling somewhere just outside the firelight. But we never saw him again. When the first gray light of dawn appeared, we packed everything in silence and headed back down the mountain. Neither of us said much. We just wanted to get out of those woods. Hours later, we reached the trailhead. that same dusty SUV was still sitting there, in the exact same spot. The sight of it made my stomach twist. Whoever had driven it out here hadn't come back. We went straight to the nearest ranger station and reported what happened. They said they'd look into it, but we never heard anything afterward. No follow-up call, no news about the man. Nothing. Whoever he wasn't a ranger. And whatever he wanted that night, I'm certain it wasn't to lead us safely home. Sometimes, I still think about that SUV, sitting alone at the edge of the wilderness, and the person who was supposed to drive it back. I used to go camping all the time with some of my buddies from college. It became our way of escaping exams, noise, and people. But after graduation, everyone drifted into different schedules and cities. I missed those nights under the trees. The laughter, the firelight, the sense of calm. Eventually, I decided to start going alone. There was one camping ground we'd used often, hidden deep in the woods, and I figured it was safe enough. It wasn't easy to get to, several miles down a dirt trail that wound through thick forest. But that was exactly why I liked it. Nobody ever came there. Other nearby campsites were closer to the highway and much more popular. Out here, I could be completely alone. I arrived just before noon. The air was crisp and quiet, the way I remembered it. After setting up my tent, gathering wood, and making sure everything was ready for the night, I sat down to enjoy the stillness. But not long after, I saw a man approaching from the trail. He looked like an average hiker, mid-30s maybe, dressed plainly, with a small backpack slung over one shoulder. What caught my attention, though, was that he didn't seem to have any camping gear. No tent, no sleeping bag, nothing. This area wasn't particularly scenic either, so I couldn't figure out why he'd hike all the way out here. Still, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just passing through, or wanted some quiet time. He gave me a brief nod before settling on the opposite side of the campground, maybe 40 yards away. We didn't speak. I tried to relax, even though I could still sense him over there. Around 6 o'clock, I went a short distance away to cook dinner with my small stove. When I came back, I noticed the man was gone. I remember thinking it was pretty late to start heading back. He had at least a 3-hour hike ahead, and the sun was already dipping behind the trees, but I was relieved. I'd wanted solitude, and now I finally had it. When the sun disappeared, I lit a small lantern and hung it on my tent. The forest came alive with faint sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, the distant call of something I couldn't place. I sat outside for a while, letting the quiet sink in. But eventually, the silence became too heavy. I realized how much I missed having my friends there to fill the night with conversation. Alone, it was just the dark and my thoughts. I climbed into my tent, turned off the lantern, and tried to sleep. Sometime later, how long I couldn't say, I woke up to the faint crunch of footsteps outside. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as I blinked into the pitch-black darkness, I could hear it clearly. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the dirt. My heart began to pound. I lay completely still, straining to listen. The steps came closer, then stopped. Whoever it was had stopped on the far side of the campground, near where the man had been earlier. I fumbled for my lantern, turned it on, and unzipped the tent just enough to see out. About 20 feet away stood a dark figure. He wasn't moving. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there. The lantern's light didn't reach him fully, but from what I could make out, The build, the way he stood. It looked like the same man from before. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound steady. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. I couldn't tell if he was facing me or turned away. But both possibilities were equally unsettling. I grabbed my pocket knife from my bag and sat frozen, staring through the half-open zipper. Minutes passed. Long, painful minutes where neither of us moved. I could hear my own heartbeat, louder than the forest itself. Then, finally, the man shifted. He turned his body and began walking slowly back toward the trail. From the brief glint of movement, I realized he had been facing me the whole time. He had just been standing there, watching me sleep. I didn't move for a long while, listening to his footsteps fade into the distance until they vanished completely. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping the knife and waiting for him to come back. He never did. At dawn, I packed my things as fast as I could and hiked out without looking back. When I reached my car, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I haven't been camping since. I don't know what that man wanted, or what might have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. But sometimes, I still see that image in my mind, a silent figure standing in the dark, just watching. I was out camping alone in the backcountry, near where I lived. I'm not much of a hiker, so I usually don't take trails more than a mile or two from the main road. This one was perfect. Just over a mile from the trailhead to my campsite by a quiet lake. I'd been there for 2 nights already and planned to stay through the weekend. On the third morning, I decided to hike back to my truck to grab my fishing rod, some extra food, and a few supplies I'd forgotten. It was a short, familiar hike, and I figured I'd try some fishing that afternoon. When I got back to camp, though, something was different. Down at the far edge of the lake, maybe 100 yards away, there was another tent. It hadn't been there before. I scanned the area, but didn't see anyone around it. No movement, no smoke, no sounds. It was odd, because there was only one narrow trail that led to this part of the lake. I hadn't seen or heard anyone on my way back, and I hadn't noticed another path that might lead here. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe they'd arrived while I was gone, or they knew another route I didn't. I set up my rod near the shore and started fishing. Every so often, I'd glance over at the new tent, half expecting to see someone come out. But for nearly 3 hours, there was nothing. No sign of life at all. As the sun started sinking behind the trees, I packed up my rod and headed back to my campsite. I cooked some food, gathered a few dry sticks, and waited for the last light to fade before lighting the campfire. That's when I saw movement. Just as the fire caught, a shadow passed through the trees ahead of me. Quick, silent, and just far enough away that I couldn't make out who or what it was. I only caught a glimpse before it disappeared into darkness. I told myself it was probably the person from the other tent gathering firewood. Still, the timing felt strange. They'd appeared right as I lit my fire. I decided not to think too much about it and leaned back in my chair, trying to relax. The lake shimmered under the faint glow of the firelight. It was calm, peaceful, almost enough to make me forget what I'd seen. Then, maybe half an hour later, I noticed movement again. Across the fire, several shapes emerged from the forest. As they came closer, the light revealed 4 men, walking in a straight line toward me. My pulse spiked immediately. I stood up, forcing a nervous smile, trying to believe they were just nearby campers. But as they entered the circle of light, that hope vanished. They looked rough. Men in their 30s or 40s. Blank expressions. No gear, no words. Just walking toward me. I stepped back and asked if they needed something. Help, directions, anything. But none of them answered. 2 of them brushed right past me, heading straight for my tent. The other 2 closed in on me, shoving me aside as they moved. That's when I knew. This wasn't random. I wanted to fight back, to yell, to do something. But there was nothing behind their eyes. They weren't there to talk. I tried reasoning, saying they could take whatever they wanted, but they didn't even react. The 2 men at my tent started tearing through my things, while the others pushed me farther away from the campfire, deeper into the trees. The light from the fire grew dim behind us. The forest swallowed everything. After about a minute of walking, they stopped. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. One of them reached into his jacket, and I didn't wait to see what came next. I bolted. I ran blindly through the woods, tripping on roots and crashing through branches. I didn't dare look back. All I could hear were my own footsteps pounding through the leaves and the blood rushing in my ears. Somehow, through sheer instinct, I found the trail again and followed it until the trees opened up and my truck came into view. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove until I hit the main road. When I finally stopped, I called the police. They investigated, but by the time anyone got there, everything was gone. My gear, my tent, my food, even my cooler. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. I still don't know who those men were or how they got there without me seeing them. But I know one thing for sure. They weren't just there to rob me. I think I was unbelievably lucky to make it out of those woods alive. Still here? Thanks for listening. Tap the link and watch 3 more horror stories.